is, it is that he still plays in a rock and roll band and on Saturday nights, and he will do so for free beer. So I suppose anybody needing to make any arrangements for that, you know where to find him. After that will be Sergeant Popovic, yay, who is here, who, in addition to his, the minor fact of bringing down a ruthless regime, he plays the bass, and I bet you guys didn't know that. So, and after that, we have James Smith, who, in addition, or Jeffrey Smith, excuse me, who likes to swing dance. So, and then batting cleanup for us this afternoon will be Dr. Charlie Vanderhorst, who, this is a little different, but I think we can figure out how to work it in. As a Jew going to a prep school in New England, somehow wormed his way into being the deacon of the chapel in order to stage a coup so that he could start diverting the funds from a charity that he did not think was consistent with his ideals, and is, inspired by the mother of civil disobedience, Fanny. You're just going to have to tell that story. So. You all know the format and how this works, so we're going to turn this over now to Professor Viator.
Thank you very much. Is on? Hello. Now it's on. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start off, as I've done at most of my panels, I'm the sort of token historian guitar player in the building. And so I like to give a historical background as just sort of a base on which everybody else can build, get an idea of definitions and examples. And so I found the best definition of civil disobedience I found in print was actually written by a famous civil disobedient, Father Robert Drinan, who was one of the Vietnam War era civil disobedient protesters. And he defines it as civil disobedience, and it has four important points in his eye, four important components. And if any one of them is gone, he thinks it's not legitimate civil disobedience. He says civil disobedience is a public, nonviolent political act contrary to law, usually done with the aim of bringing about a change in the law or policies of the government. And so he says the idea of civil disobedience, if you break that down, has four components. First of all, it's most justifiable when prior political and legal activities to effect the change have been undertaken but have failed. Then secondly, the acts of civil disobedience must be done for a moral political purpose, that is to make a point about improving the political system or the society. Third, it has to be performed openly and publicly. And then finally, the actor, the civil disobedient, must be willing to accept punishment for whatever law he has broken as part of his act of civil disobedience. So he thinks those are the four components that make for legitimate civil disobedience in our constitutional system. The American Constitution does not provide immunity for those who practice civil disobedience, although there might be constitutional rights that the actors, the civil disobedient actors, are trying to create, and then it turns out that what they did was not illegal. At the time they did it, it was illegal. But there's not a general principle of immunity for acts of civil disobedience under either the U.S. Constitution or any of the state constitutions. But there are two of the really great examples show you how what starts off, two of the great examples in American history of civil disobedience movements will show you how what starts off as illegal ends up as having been blessed over by the society by the end of the campaign. The first one is the women's suffrage campaign, which started in the mid-19th century and began to pick up steam after the Civil War. And of course, the goal was to get the vote for women. And so they satisfied Father Drynen's definition because they first started off with political activities, the typical kind, lobbying state legislatures, since the states are at that time were more or less entirely in control of voting standards. So they started off by politicking, lobbying legislatures, lobbying Congress. Then they shifted to litigation, and their case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. They had argued that under the 14th Amendment, which gave limited voting rights to African Americans, and then under the 15th Amendment, which gave full voting rights to African Americans, they went to the Supreme Court and argued that that applies to all citizens, not just to African American citizens. They lost that case. So after they lost that case, then they moved into the stage of civil disobedience. The most common practice for the suffrage movement was they would find a registrar who was more or less sympathetic, and they would go and register to vote, and then they would vote, and they'd be arrested for voting illegally. So that was the civil disobedience phase, and that got more and more attention because it was massive civil disobedience. You know, virtually every election there were people getting arrested, and that would be covered in the newspaper and everything of the day. And then once they got that attention, they then shifted to a constitutional amendment. And they had established the morality, the good faith of their movement by all of them willingly going to jail. And even when people wanted to pardon them and get them out early, they insisted on serving their sentence. It was usually for trespass or something like that, or voter fraud. But they would insist on serving their sentence, and that got them very much sympathy in the nation. And they were eventually successful with the 19th Amendment, with the Women's Voting Rights Amendment. Closer to our time, many of us of a certain age can remember the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, which followed the same trajectory. It started off with litigation, and there were several Supreme Court opinions that tampered a little bit with Jim Crow, with de jure segregation. But they hit the litigation strategy hit a wall after Brown versus Board of Education. It was successful up to the schoolhouse door and into the schoolhouse, and then it bogged down. Swimming pools, theaters, department stores, all of that bogged down. Political action was tried. There was a Civil Rights Act of 1957. It didn't do much. And so then they went into the civilly disobedient phase. The famous lunch counter sit-ins, where they would go to a lunch counter in a de jure segregation state, and it was against the law for them to sit in the white patron section. They would go sit down. They'd be asked to leave. They'd refuse to leave. They'd be arrested for criminal trespass, and they would serve their time. Martin Luther King was arrested for criminal trespass in a sit-in and wrote the famous letter from Birmingham jail, quote, "I submit that an individual who breaks a law that his conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty by staying in jail to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the very highest respect for law." Some of the civil disobedient acts of the civil rights movement, some of the acts of civil disobedience were then got all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, usually on on First Amendment grounds, usually freedom of assembly, freedom to petition, free speech, sometimes on equal protection grounds. I won't bore you with the case names, but they established precedents for desegregating publicly open to the public places like lunch counters, and they established the right of people to peaceably assemble, and meaning if they assembled peaceably, they couldn't be arrested for disturbing the peace, which is what they were always arrested for. And the petition and assembly Supreme Court cases said no, as long as it's a civil demonstration, a peaceful demonstration, they can't be arrested for breaching the peace. And also the right of association, that they can associate with one another for petitioning. So those were important precedents where it started off, the action was illegal, but eventually it got to the Supreme Court and everything was protected by the Constitution. Very important for speech, assembly, and equal protection. Starting off with the act that was technically illegal, serving the full sentence in jail, but appealing those sentences and eventually getting favorable rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court. And without those acts of civil disobedience, probably the Civil Rights Act of 1964 would have been delayed by many, many years, because the Civil Rights Act of 1964 really created that any place open to the public, motels, lunch counters, restaurants, anything open to the public, beaches, swimming pools, that under the Equal Protection Clause, there could be no discrimination on the basis of race. So those are two examples where, following Father Robert Drynen's definition, and he got his definition from studying these civil disobedience movements, following that prescription, got the society eventually, after great struggle, to change its mind, and to create the sort of social, political, legal change that was the object of the movement from the very start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Srdja.
Hi, great to be here. I started my journey as a Serbian student in '90s when I discovered the great mega rock band singing against the war that Milosevic was starting in former Yugoslavia. And this is how my book Blueprint for Revolution starts. That was the day where I understood that the activism, which of course I assumed is reserved for the old ladies fighting the dogs' rights, can be cool. And in fact can be something that brings people together. We started very small as a group of 11 people, went through the 992 student demonstration, 96, 97 students demonstration, 998 we formed a movement called Otpor, which eventually was instrumental in kicking out one of the worst guys in Balkans history from power in 2000. Since then, we have worked with groups from, I think, 43, 44 different countries. Some of them were terribly successful. People from Georgia, people from Ukraine, people from Lebanon, people from Maldives, people from Burma. Some of them were terribly unsuccessful, like people from Belarus or people from Zimbabwe. What strikes me the most is that the constant interaction with the people who are involved in civil disobedience really teaches you a lot of lessons, and you constantly learn. Even if you think that you know a lot, even if you teach this in schools, you keep getting the information, you keep being surprised by creativity, you keep being shocked by the level of oppression the governments are ready to impose in some countries. And what we try to figure out, and what I'm trying to condense in the next 7 or 8 minutes, are what we have learned. First thing we've learned, how many of you have read Lord of the Rings, my personal Bible? Okay, you know the hobbits. You know they're tall, strong, well-equipped with magic and weapons? No. They are short, big feet, they love good food, good drink, smoking pot, sounded they are like coming from Boulder. Well, what strikes me the most, it's always the hobbits. It's never the big players, it's never the political mainstream players. Majority of nonviolent revolutions across the world are brought about through the common people, or artificial term would be political outsiders. And actually the people power-based movements are the best way for common people to participate in a social change, which is why the social change tends to be more durable and more stable than the social change brought through elites or the military struggle. Second thing, how the nonviolent struggle starts, it starts with another iconic hero, Harry Potter. So you start your journey by asking yourself, if I would have a Harry Potter or Hermione Granger, to make it genderly correct, magic wand, how my society would be different, how my community would be different. Because without this answer to this question, your journey will be, you will be just lost in the jungle. Too often, the people tend to go out and protest because they're pissed off. In his stellar book, which is considered to be the leftist activist Bible, Saul Alinsky said, anger is a very powerful mobilizer, but anger without hope is a destructive force per se. So you need to know where you are going before you start to go there, and this is the must for majority of the movements. From cool hobbits and nice Harry Potter's world back to reality. The way we, in my organization called Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies, or Canvas, which deals with this stuff and trains groups across the world for more than a decade, I feel old now, we are looking at it as a form of warfare, which means the principles of warfare outlined by Sun Tzu are very applicable. And Sun Tzu is the guy who says, know the terrain, know your opponent, and know yourself, and you will know the outcome of the 1,000 battles. So you start by identifying the battlefield. What are the conditions? What is the spectrum of allies? What are the groups who are opposing your idea and why? What may be the groups you can recruit for your idea? You continue by examining your opponent. Our opponents tend to present us as omnipotent agencies, whether they are the big business people involved in dirty industries in a very environmentally aware environment like Boulder, or they are the big ugly dictators in places like North Korea. But they have weaknesses. As Gene Sharp, one of the biggest theoreticians of nonviolent struggle, say, the biggest weakness of the oppressor is that however ruthless they are, if people do not obey, rulers cannot rule. And then you look at yourself. How do you build numbers? How do you maintain morale? How do you build a movement's identity? Do you need a charismatic leader? Do you need a symbol? All of these are questions for the novices in nonviolent struggle. Every time you meet a new group of people from places like Burma or Cambodia, it always starts the same way. Oh, you Serbs were tremendous in doing it, but this will never happen in my home because the regime is too oppressive, because the people are too busy buying in Walmarts, whatever because. Well, yes, every single struggle is different, but the principles which determine whether the struggle is successful are all the same. And we call them the Holy Trinity of nonviolent struggle. We're looking at whether there is a unity, whether this is a political unity, social unity, racial unity achieved. It was not when Martin Luther King mobilized black people when he started winning. It was when the white people start joining. It was not when Harvey Milk mobilized all the gay people of San Francisco to vote for him. In fact, he lost that election miserably. It was when he understood that he needed a cool straight people on his side. So his first campaign was one on unifying proposition, which was, believe it or not, how to clean up San Francisco of the dog's poop. Because that tackled the gay and straight people equally. Second is the principle of planning. However, you may see the people on CNN, super thrilled anchor will say, oh, what a spontaneous uprising, there are a million people in front of the parliament. It's a crap. You don't get from 10 people to million people by being spontaneous. You get there by meticulous strategic and tactical planning. There are only two types of nonviolent revolutions in this world. They're either spontaneous or successful. Spontaneity will only get you killed. Last but not of least importance, nonviolent discipline. One single act of violence can destroy all of your efforts. Imagine organizing a peaceful march of hundreds of thousands of people, and then you have 10 drunk idiots or agents provocateurs whatsoever start breaking windows or cars. Guess who gets tomorrow's cover page of New York Times? These 10 idiots. So when you're looking at it and when you're looking at the group and whether it's not going to be successful, look if there is a diversity and if these principles are in place. Serbs are very unserious people. We joke about everything, and which makes us a pretty unsuccessful but very amusing nation. And which is where we discovered the power of humor. And we were the group of 10 people with a budget of $50 when we came to the very politically incorrect idea to paint Mr. President on a big petrol barrel, bring it into the main shopping district, put a little hole so you can put a coin in, and then you get a big baseball bat so you can express your love for the president by hitting the barrel. Within the range of 10 minutes, 200 people were waiting. And that was not the funny part. The funny part was when police arrived. What the heck they will do? We are nowhere to be seen, to arrest the downtown shoppers and, accuse them for what? And of course, they did the most stupid thing in the world. They arrested the barrel. So the photograph of the barrel being dragged to the police car was a good opportunity for photojournalists, but it also proved the power of humor. A, humor breaks fear. B, humor adds the cool factor to your movement. Think who is the most popular person in your phone book? Tallest, strongest, richest, or the one who can always make you laugh? So think about this. We call this phenomenon loftivism, and we write and publish a lot about it. From experience to statistics, 60 miles from here at University of Denver, there's a great young woman called Erica Chenoweth who wrote a great study called Why Civil Resistance Work. She was looking at the 323 different cases of violent and nonviolent campaigns in the last century. Guess what? Nonviolent campaigns tend to be twice more likely to succeed than the violent campaigns, twice more likely to succeed over the short time span, and 10 times more likely to produce a durable democracy. This is science. Now, I'm not a scientist, though they allow me to teach in several places, including Colorado College, which is nearby. Hopefully, we'll find a host and poison your youth with our dangerous ideas here in Boulder. Last but not of least importance, I think it's a learning curve. I've just participated in a panel where we were discussing Putin and NATO and air shields and stuff like that. I think the era of nukes is over. The era of winning over the hearts and minds of the people have begun. To quote Ben Franklin, there are three types of people in this world. There are those unmovable, there are those movable, and there are those who move. I think our eternal mission is to empower those who move with the knowledge on how to change their societies for better. Thank you.
How many people here have engaged in nonviolent protest or civil disobedience? Amazing. Look around. Keep your hands up. Look around. Now give yourself an applause. My area is GMOs, and some of the most famous nonviolent or civil disobedient actions is crop pulling, which was popular in Europe. They tried, it was the same four issues that was mentioned in the beginning. They tried legally, they had morality on their side, they were able to get coverage through some very creative acts, and they were willing to pay the penalty. But it was interesting, I was talking to some of the crop pullers as I was traveling and speaking in Europe, and there was a lord who had participated in the crop pulling, and because he was in it, they really came down hard, and there was a big trial, and everyone was nervous because some people would lose their jobs if they were convicted. And it was really serious. And the jury acquitted them. And the juries and the people who are the defendants never see each other during or after the trial. But as they left the courtroom, all the jury members were standing outside to give them hugs, because they realized that this was an appropriate action to protect essentially all living beings and all future generations from a corrupt science that had been put into play without democracy and without scientific backbone. I was talking to another person that was a crop puller, and the judge ordered, he was caught, the judge ordered him to rat on his fellow crop pullers. He refused, and the judge put him in jail for like 100 days. And every day there was a line of protesters going up and down the streets with big banners. It made headlines all over the nation. It was the best thing for the anti-GMO movement, and they, of course, kicked him out of jail and said, okay, we're letting you go, because it turned out to work against them. Now, it's not always appropriate to use civil disobedience. It depends on the target, the context, etc. In the United States, I never recommend it because some of the laws are written to turn it into a terrorist act, which could put someone to jail for decades. And so when I looked at it and did a strategic analysis, much as you mentioned, what are the strengths and weaknesses? What, I wanted to learn about what does Monsanto do to propose or to propagate its GMOs? What can I do? They've got $1 billion, I've got $1.95. Where is their weakness? And we created a strategy that was not civil disobedience in the way that we've heard, but it was a disobedience to the corporatocracy, to the corporate dictated lines about GMOs are safe, just eat them and shut up and all that. We realized there was a democracy to win, not just at the ballot box, but at the cash register. And that was their greatest weakness. they could control politicians. They could have a huge influence in the courts. They could create tobacco science and marginalize and attack and threaten scientists who came up with real adverse findings. And they have done all of those things. They have even bribed officials and got convicted. But where they were weak is in consumers trying to protect themselves and their children, trying to get healthy. So our strategy did not require civil disobedience. And in fact, in the United States, because the mainstream media was not covering the problems related to GMOs, it's been a biased mainstream media, basically giving out the talking points from Monsanto. It wasn't really an appropriate venue to get that type of attention. Sometimes Greenpeace would do some really fun things. When there was a contamination of genetically modified corn engineered to produce a pig vaccine and it had contaminated a silo of soybeans, they snuck in there and put a big banner up saying, "Your food on drugs, just say no." And so that picture made it around the world. It was illegal and it was designed to get media coverage. But the media coverage was not going to win. People would just say, "What's this? What's this?" But there was so much pro-GMO messaging in the media that it wasn't going to tip. However, when you do the math on this particular strategy and you're trying to eliminate GMOs, because they have no consumer benefit, you only need a small percentage of the population seeking non-GMO food, causing a drop in market share, that as soon as the food companies realize that's the reason I'm losing, we already got rid of it in Europe because of a tipping point there, we have to get rid of it in the United States. I just said something I want to repeat. They got rid of it in Europe because of a tipping point there. GMOs are not illegal in Europe to eat, but they're illegal, so to speak, by Unilever, Nestle's, McDonald's, Burger King, because of the high-profile news coverage about GMO dangers in 1999, which caused Unilever first and Nestle second and everyone else within a week to say no more GMOs. And it was not based on the civil disobedience, it was based on education and behavior change messaging. Now, there's principles from civil disobedience that are part of this strategy. For example, online, social media activism. There's a group called GMO Inside, and they strategically target specific food companies like General Mills and Cheerios, very carefully targeted, and then initiated a campaign which ended up putting 50,000 negative posts on their Facebook page, asking them to go non-GMO in Cheerios. And non-GMO Cheerios was introduced at the beginning of 2014 as a defensive measure because of this type of cyber organizing. Very similar principles, if we analyze it, to that open kind of civil disobedience, but on a different scale, not breaking the law. So when I look at these strategies in terms of behavior change messaging and how to respond, I want to put it in a bigger context. I mentioned the word corporatocracy because I borrow it from another speaker. It's where those companies that are supposed to be regulated are actually running the show. So the energy companies regulate themselves. The GMO companies regulate themselves. The classic example is the person in charge of policy at the FDA for GMOs was Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president, now the US food safety czar. So they do their own legislation, they do their own regulation, and they control the messaging as well. And this is a very dangerous, non-democratic situation. And with civil disobedience, it's often nice to have a particular target, often the government, high profile, that's going to be covered in the news. So what are you going to do in this situation where the medicine is controlled by the pharmaceuticals and the agriculture is controlled by the big ag, etc.? In some cases, you have to require policy change, and that's harder. With GMOs, it's easy. You can do it in the marketplace. But by doing it in the marketplace, we're also educating people to change a basic opinion of themselves. There's so much sense of an oppression of all these corrupt government running the show, corporations running the show, that we become victims. But as we are winning the GMO battle and changing victim to victor, it changes our relationship with this corporatocracy. We realize that we, in fact, can manifest magnificent change, that we are the change agents, and that we're also responsible. And if you look at the source of the GMO problems around the world, it's an antidote of the opposite feeling. It's the sense that, oh, someone else is taking care of this, and I'm sure they're doing a good job. So I've been to 42 countries, and I speak to some developing countries. Well, you don't do any safety testing on GMOs. Oh, we don't have to, because the FDA already passed it. If you know the story about the FDA, their policy, written by Monsanto's former attorney, is that the companies themselves determine if their foods are safe and don't have to get approval by the FDA and don't have to do any safety studies. And then I talked to a former Monsanto scientist. He said 3 of his colleagues did the safety studies in the company on the milk from cows treated with the bovine growth hormone, the genetically engineered drug from Monsanto, and found so much hormone that produces cancer in the milk, the 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. So if you track it back, no one is taking care of us. And everyone thinks someone is taking care of us. So I realize part of the issue, which has its parallel both in the strategies, the market-based strategies that I'm doing, and civil disobedience, is the antidote to this one concept, that someone else is responsible and I'm sure they're doing fine. And the antidote is, I'm in charge. What can I do to act responsibly? Some people become generalists. They want to make sure all the things they purchase are fair trade and whatnot, and some people are specialists like me. And I focus on one thing, and I work strategy, and I create behavior change messaging in books and films. And I'm happy to say that after 20 years in working this, I am seeing a coming tipping point in the next couple of years in the United States. We are kicking out GMOs from the food supply based on consumer behavior. So that's very good news. And I also want you to know that I personally am scared of civil just I have to say that next to this man who is not scared. I mean, I had friends of mine, I went to the free trade area of the Americas, and they said, there's a big protest tomorrow. I said, okay, I'll go. And they said, you may not want to. Well, they herded them all into a place where there was no media, and then they beat them up. And I don't feel like that's my role, to be beaten up and whatnot. So I want to just end by saying, I really honor you so much, sir, for your work. And I think it's amazing that this man was critical in toppling an oppressive regime in his home country and now around the world. What a superhero. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And now, Charlie?
It's great to be here. This is my 6th panel so far this week. So a little bit about, this is an incredible panel. I find on every panel I learn something, and on this panel in particular I feel a little inadequate. Because, you know, I'm not a brave guy. I was arrested in 2013, in May of 2013 in North Carolina in our state legislature. But I want to tell you a little bit about why I came to the decision to be arrested, and a little bit about the Moral Monday movement and why we're successful, and I think really the only successful broad movement in the United States today. So my parents survived the Holocaust and World War II in Europe, and then emigrated in '52, right after I was born, and they were appalled at the United States, the segregation. They survived the Nazis. They come over here. They see the John Birch Society, McCarthyism, and segregation. So they immediately joined the ACLU in 1952, the NAACP, and various activist organizations. And I was marching with my parents for fair housing in middle school. In high school was the anti-war movement, and I was gathering signatures, and I did divert the chapel funds. I'd learned in American history of this very famous woman, you should Google her, Fannie Lou Hamer, from Sunflower, Mississippi.
and I wrote to her. There's no internet then. And I wrote to her. I said, what would you do with $1,500? She told me, and so I diverted it from the Boy Scouts to Fannie Lou Hamer. And then imagine this. I'm at my trial and in 2013, the end of 2013, and my volunteer attorney, she said, you know, in Superior Court, this is serious. You need to know you were charged with singing and chanting and waving a placard. You need to know what songs you were singing and what you were chanting and the origin of them, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things we sang was This Little Light of Mine, I'm Going to Let It Shine, which originates from the book of Matthew, I found out. But guess who turned it into a civil rights protest song? Fannie Lou Hamer. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, so my parents, I was on the longest doctor's strike in U.S. history in 1980. And then I got to North Carolina and got involved in the AIDS crisis. So as I said, I'm not brave. I was arrested, but I'm a wealthy white physician with tenure. I've had 2 minor things. You might not think they're so minor. After I went on strike, I was blackballed from infectious disease fellowship programs, except for UNC, who thought it was laughable that you would want to blackball someone for going on strike. And when I was arrested, the hospital started putting a lot of pressure on me and contributed part my deciding to retire early. I'm a great believer in Thoreau, in Martin Luther King, and I'll give you a couple quotes that I gave at my trial. So Martin Luther King, in the letter from the Birmingham jail, wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And Thoreau, in 1849, on civil disobedience, about the Mexican-American War, he wrote, "Those who, while they disapprove of the character and measures of a government, yield to it their allegiance and support, are undoubtedly its most conscientious supporters." So you can't get away with inaction, and frequently the most serious obstacles to reform. So what happened is I did go through the steps. Our state legislature and governorship switched to Republicans in 2012. They immediately decided they were not going to expand Medicaid, and they were going to do voter restriction, nail down immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was asked to focus on Medicaid by our broad movement. So with our Democratic legislators, we held a press conference in February. I wrote an op-ed outlining the reasons why it was essential that we expand Medicaid, and nothing happened. They passed the bill to forever ban expansion of Medicaid without even any debate, and certainly with no expert witness. I was charged, along with, I think, 26 other people, with 3 charges, eventually over 950 people. And I decided to go to trial for one single reason. There was a photo taken of me, and this is iconic photos. It's interesting. I didn't set it up. I was asked by Reverend Barber to wear my white coat, my long white coat, and the state newspaper photographer took a picture of me from the side with my hands handcuffed behind my back, being led by these burly state troopers in my white coat. And that ended up on the front page, above the fold in the newspaper. So all of a sudden, everybody was talking about it, even though there were many other braver, young students had something to lose. I didn't have anything to lose. But the fact that a wealthy white man of privilege was arrested as opposed to an African American, that brought the attention to the movement. And so I made the decision. I discussed it with fellow people about would I go ahead with the trial. And I said, if it doesn't get covered, then it's just useless. It's a waste of my time and everybody's time. But if it ends up being important, and it ended up every time I went to that courthouse over the next year, it was on the front page of the paper. So it was very worthwhile, and it generated a lot of publicity. Now, why are we successful? It's called the Moral Monday movement or Forward Together movement. Bill Moyers did a special on it. You may have seen it, and I'm in that. Well, one thing, it's a broad movement. I may not be interested in GMO, and the GMO folks may be not interested in immigration thing. But we subsume our things. We have Jews and Muslims. If we made this about Israel, we would never advance, okay? But we don't. Black churches in the South, they don't like gay people or gay rights. They don't like immigration reform because they're worried it's going to take jobs away. Christians, they always end their prayers, a lot of them, with "in Jesus' name," who I could care less about. But Reverend Barber keeps us focused, okay? If one of his colleagues ends up in Jesus' name, Reverend Barber pops up immediately, talks about Muslims, Jews, and atheists. We all are moral people. So it's a broad movement. We have a great leader. In the broad movement, we all agreed to have the NAACP North Carolina lead us. So they coordinate everything. I'm a member, card-carrying member, get all my things. They coordinate for the immigrants, for the unions, for United Church of Christ, for Universalists, for the synagogues, for immigration reform, for environmentalists, for GMO. It's all in our movement, okay? And they coordinate. Our other success is Reverend Barber because he's a good guy and he just is a powerful speaker, and you're always moved to tears. And then the third thing is we keep our eye on the prize. It's important that you keep your focus on what your goal is and what you want. So what have we accomplished? People say, well, what have we accomplished? Well, we are unique in being a broad-based movement. The legislature was switched by Art Pope, a right-wing millionaire in North Carolina. He did polling on his own to find out which districts were 50-50 that could easily switch from Democratic to Republican. It turned out to be only 21 districts. He targeted just $2 million in 21 districts and flipped 19. Just before the census, and then they gerrymandered themselves into permanent thing. So we understand, and Reverend Barber says, this is a marathon, okay? It's not, you know, we're going to be at this for a while, through the next census. Last year, so I don't give money to sure winners in elections. If they're in a safe district, they don't need my money. I don't give money to sure losers. If they're in a Republican district and there's no way they're going to win, it's a waste of my money. I give to people who are in 50-50 or 45-55 districts, and I publicize that and I raise money for them. So 2 years ago, we flipped 2 districts. This year, I think we're going to be able to flip 4 more districts. We also generate a lot of publicity, and we educate the public who otherwise wouldn't be there. So we still protest and do that. And we generate hope. I have lots of hope for the future. The demographics are changing in the United States, and what we're seeing this year is as I've said at multiple panels so far, it's the last dying gasp of scared old white men. And they're going to die, thankfully. And it's going to be gay people and Muslims and young people and black people, and everybody is going to be there, and they're going to vote those assholes out. So what do I think? I always end my panels, with recommendations. Protest. Denver is only an hour away. I spoke on civil disobedience at Wash U, and they say, oh, Springfield's so far away. I said, it's an hour away. You can get there. So Denver's only an hour away. Get your buddies, round up people who you may not know, and go there. Join together, all right? Like I said, you may be interested in the environment. Why don't you reach out and see what the homeless advocates are interested in? What's their issue? What about the immigrants reform in your state? Lead toxicity, whatever. Phone bank. So my house, once a night, I provide dinner. The phone bank people come in, 8 people, young and old, and they make phone calls. I don't, because I'm terrible on the phone and I get angry if people don't do it. But I cook them dinner and provide the space and let them do it. And then prior to the election, you know, my kids are grown and gone. The bedrooms, we got 3 bedrooms. They come in, and the election workers and poll workers come, and voter registration folks stay with us. Raise money for them for voter education, voter registration projects. And that's it. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you. And before we get to questions from the audience, this is the opportunity for our panelists to comment on each other's talks or ask questions. Anybody? All right.
Yes, I have a question. How do you pronounce your first name, first of all? Sergio. If anyone would like to donate vowels to Sergio.
Eaten all the vowels in Serbia after we have eaten the last vegetarians. Vegetarians in the audience, beware.
So, Sergio, I'm interested to know, in the areas where the civil disobedience failed, in the areas where you thought it would succeed or it had the same basic elements that other successes had, what were the surprise effects? What were the lessons that you learned, or the new elements that came in that we can learn from?
Well, this is normally a 2-hour block called Why Movements Fail, but I'll try to condense it into the 2 minutes. They're like, when you're looking at nonviolent movement, you're looking basically at 3 phases. The first phase we call the breakout phase or emerging phase. This is where the movement gets the vision and identity and appears on a scene. The second part is when it gains numbers. We call it engagement phase. So you're capable of carrying out the strategies and tactics. The last and probably most tangible phase is the victory phase. So one of our lessons is called surviving the victory, because this is very often complicated. In any phase, a movement can fail because it loses one of the things. It may lose unity. At some point, you know, the people are seeing that they are better off. And, you know, when you see 16 presidential candidates running against the Lukashenko, you know who is going to win the election. And then in the second thing, the movement can lose the nonviolent discipline. Syrian movement started as a whole-scale nonviolent movement. At some point, they were struck with a great idea that only because Sarkozy intervened and Obama was leading from behind in Libya, the good idea is to take weapons and challenge Assad. Look at what came out of it. The same thing happened to the South African movement. It was not because he was nonviolent that Nelson Mandela was sitting in a Robben Island. It was because they made a stupid mistake and tried to challenge one of the most powerful African militaries with violence. Last but not of least importance, movement makes strategic mistakes. It was failing to proclaim a victory at the right place, which killed Tiananmen. And when we were researching for a Blueprint for Revolution book, I met the Chinese dissident who, by the way, was a DJ of Tiananmen, the person who was playing music for students, who told me that the military generals were ready to concede and to play with the students. Instead of getting what they want in the negotiations, proclaiming the victory and leaving the square, which will probably change China in a very dramatic way, they decided to stay. And 2 days after that, the tanks came from Manchuria, and the rest is history. So there are so many reasons why movement failed. Egyptians failed in planning. They simply proclaimed game over too early in the process, not taking into the consideration then when the situation is chaotic, it is mostly the most organized group in the society, namely the Muslim Brotherhood and the military, who will step in and try to grab the prize. So there are plenty of reasons, and all of these reasons should be discussed in early stages of the movement, and you need to predict them, because these things will come. This is not happening to somebody else. And the more you plan around these things, the better are the chances for success.
Anybody else on the panel have anything you want to offer? All right. How about the audience? Any questions from anybody? All right, please step up to the microphone. Yes, hi, thank you so much for taking questions. With the title of this panel right now, Civil Disobedience, Who would like to take that? James, you want to give that a start?
Yeah, I would say to the extent that the question involves sort of getting around or in some way going underground the surveillance state. What I can say from the anti-slavery movement, from the women's suffrage movement, civil rights movement, you don't want to get around these laws. You want to violate them very publicly, very peacefully, take your punishment, and hope for mistakes on the other side. And I think we've heard people talk about eventually the opponents are going to give you a great photo op or a great campaign point. For the women's suffrage movement, it was when it kicked up to get a constitutional amendment, it was picketing the White House, which was perfectly constitutional even in 1918 in wartime. But they knew the police were going to overreact. And the police were roughing up women in bustles with nice hats, everybody's mother, everybody's sister, their aunts. The police roughed them up. That turned the tide. So that was the point Martin Luther King made about publicly. You have to do this in public. And you have to violate the law and then go off to jail in handcuffs or something.
I would just add that one of the missteps that the right-wing Pope and his foundation did is they thought they were going to intimidate us by putting all our mugshots up. So there were 950 mugshots up on a website they had, and including our addresses, home addresses, our age, and if we were a public employee, our salaries, our annual salaries. So mine, all that was up there on the web. And it totally backfired because everyone was saying that this was an outside agitator movement, these were just poor blacks, et cetera, et cetera. And someone then went ahead and actually put it into a database and published the data, the newspaper did. And we were white, we were employed, we were in the private sector, we were business people, we were everything. And we all were from North Carolina. So it actually helped our movement as opposed to intimidating us.
I want to add that civil disobedience is one option. I love hearing the strategy that you shared. I love hearing all those points, how well it's thought through. But if I were to enter Canvas to get training, I've already made a decision. And that decision has another strategic session prior to that. Have we fought it on the legal level? Have we fought it on the media level? Have we fought it in social media? Have we created memes? Have we created humor? Have we created petitions? Have we created drama, stories? Have we storyized the problem? So, you know, an example that was told to me by a group that does petitions. He said they're one of the most successful petition groups, and they said they were trying to fight the Boy Scouts' ban on gays. So instead of doing a petition on tell the Boy Scouts not to ban gays, they said, you know, such and such is 17 years old. He's been in the Boy Scouts for 9 years. In 3 weeks, he's supposed to get his Eagle Scout, but he's gay. And he's about to be ... So it became about him. They had tremendous coverage. They taught him how to be on media. They had tremendous media, and that turned it. In the old days, we didn't have the internet. So that organizing principle wasn't available. And that, I think, is a tremendous power right now as an alternative or a precursor, perhaps, to civil disobedience that could deal with that police state that you described. So I just want to put that in context. It's not yes or no to civil disobedience. That's one piece. And as was mentioned at the beginning, it's after other attempts have occurred. And the attempts, it's not just legal now, it would also be social media and other things before going into that level.
Yeah, I would really emphasize that all of the successful movements, given the American political tradition of respecting constitutional values, an appeal is always made to a higher law, something above the mere written statute or whatever it is that needs to be changed. And that appeal is made early on, politically, socially, from the pulpit, petitioning legislatures, and when it fails, then is the time to stand on that same moral principle and violate the law. And that is what these movements have learned creates the eventual legislative or even constitutional success What I worry about is, does anybody have the attention span nowadays? It was 1842, Seneca Falls Women's Conference, and it wasn't until 1920 that the 19th Amendment was ratified. Does this society have the stick-to-itiveness? And also the focus is really important. The women's rights movement was involved in the anti-slavery movement, in the temperance movement, and eventually they realized we gotta just focus on one thing because of attention span and overload and all of that. And all of that takes discipline and also stick-to-itiveness. And I think those are the things that current movements need to think about.
Sir, you have a question over there?
I've been learning quite a bit about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict during this conference, knowing that the goal of Israeli Zionist leaders is to take over all of Palestine. How can we get people of goodwill in Israel to develop a constitution of equal rights to all and equal protection to all? The related question is, with the boycott, divest, and sanction movement that's beginning to take place, how can we work with employees of Hewlett-Packard and of Caterpillar to help them to say, hey, we should not sell Israel the products that are destroying the homes of Palestinians or conduct surveillance on the Palestinians? Simple question. I hope there's a good answer.
Actually don't think it's a simple question. It's a very complicated issue, and I think you've oversimplified it, frankly. So I'm Jewish. I hate Bibi Netanyahu. I've stopped giving money to the Jewish National Fund. I give to Jewish and Arab joint groups working in Israel. There are a lot of people in Israel who hate Bibi Netanyahu. Okay, he won a majority, but he didn't win everyone in Israel. So they're not going lockstep. And but it is a democratic society, and they keep voting him in office because they're frightened. Okay, and Hamas has made serious mistakes because they frightened the people and they chose a hardline guy like Bibi. So I don't like him, but it is a democratic society. And I ask you, what are you doing as a Boulderite about Saudi Arabia, our #1 ally, who we support tooth and nail, that is spreading terrorism throughout the world? You know, all the bombers on the 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia, yet they're our best buddies. George W. Bush had photo ops with the king. So I think it's a complicated issue that is not going to be solved here, and that both sides, there are leaders who are cynically manipulating their people, both Hamas and Bibi Netanyahu, and it's a problem. And I don't think that when you say that, I think it's actually patronizing to the people of Israel when you say, how can we get good people? There are plenty of good people who are working. They have, there's Yet Desh, which is a group that publishes, it's a Jewish group that publishes bad things against that are happening in Israel. So I just think it's an issue we shouldn't get into, frankly.
I share your heritage and are members of similar groups. And I hope that from the citizens we can develop change. I do not expect leadership from our country or from Israel or from the Arab nations, but I hope that in some way citizens can have an influence to create a better world for them and for all.
Thank you, sir. And okay, we have a student over here.
My question is directed towards Serja. What is the process of ensuring long-term political stability after the movement and civil disobedience?
Well, it's a million-dollar questions, and we certainly know enough on how to structure successful strategies and tactics in order to shake. And the question is how to make it shape. And I think they are, at least, I can tell it from the Serbian transition, which ended up pretty successfully in terms of we are now a democratic society, not the most economically prosperous, but in the same time what we wanted we gained. First of all, know what you know very early in the process, know what you want, stick to the vision. And the Serbian vision was not about bringing down the Milosevic. It was a necessary step. It was a tool to get where we wanted. Our vision was tackling the three topics. First one, freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, free and fair elections, which we didn't have. Second one was, of course, a road to the European Union in the time when the country was completely isolated under sanctions and NATO bombs in 90s. And then the third one was a peace with neighbors, with whom we waged 5 wars within the range of the 10 years. Amazingly, that became a society mainstream. The people who are in power now were the people who were sharing power with Milosevic. But they are the most vocal Europeans, freedom advocates and best friends of Bosnians and Croats now, because these values became the mainstream of the society. So I think the key is to know and how to structure your vision around the values. And also have a plan in place. We had the mayor sworn the very night Milosevic stepped down, so somebody can tell to the people, don't break windows. We had a new president sworn 2 days after Milosevic stepped down. So there is this pillar of support, because when you have a vacuum, it can be very dangerous. And within the vacuum, very often military steps in, and then we call this a coup. So the third thing is like we had a transition government and all of these institutions. So have a clear vision, set up the values, and have a plan in place. Also, what we did the day one with the new government, we continue pressure on them to deliver on values. One of the mistakes the group makes is that they put too much trust in the new elites only because they are new. Very often you get disappointed. Instead of trusting politicians, try sticking to the values. That kinds of guarantees durability.
Yes, I just want to know, as a, say, a leader of creating or helping protests happen, how do you keep your protesters in line to stay peaceful? Because I know in several other protests, not only in the US, but say France, Belgium, protests do sometimes end up going violent. How do you keep those protesters in line to stay peaceful?
I can give an example from the civil rights movement, from the sit-in movement. Very athletic and physical gentlemen from the local churches, wherever the protests were going to be held. And there were connections amongst black churches in the South, created an organization called the Deacons of Defense. And their job at protests were to do two things: to help protect the protesters if the police got out of control, and also to usher away troublemakers, usher them away. And that was a very successful tactic, and there were very few civil rights protests in the 50s and 60s that looked like the days of rage. I think there were none. And it was the Deacons of Defense that did it, which was church-based and had only one job: to make sure to protect and to get rid of troublemakers, which is also part of the protection. You can't provoke the law enforcement authorities.
And we still use those in North Carolina. Plus, I would add training. So we were trained beforehand. We knew we were going to get arrested. We had a training thing. We actually met with a lawyer beforehand and signed documents that they would represent us, and they told us what to do. I had my stethoscope over my shoulder. They said, take it down because people are going to take it off because people are going to think it's a weapon. We didn't have wood sticks on the signs. We held up posters without the sticks because that could be construed as a weapon. So it was all planned out in advance.
Skill, and the skills can be taught and learned, as previous two gentlemen said. I will add to this: a very dangerous thing is not to predict that there will be a potentially violent group that shares your values but not your commitment to nonviolence. In Serbia, that was soccer fans. In most of the anti-globalist protests, it is black bloc. So you have all of these crazy people who will come in and overtake it. 3 years ago, in Italy, there was the major anti-globalist protests, and they knew the black bloc will be there and start burning cars. So they came out with a very interesting social media idea. They got 100 euro reward for the best video and 50 euro reward for a best photo shot for those who are making violence. So they turned 100,000 people into the reporters who were reporting on those who were committing violence, which A, clearly distinguished the movement from those who are committing violence, and B, obviously helped the police to identify the individuals who were violent.
Thank you. That great idea. So of the two of you, do you know who's all right?
So it was mentioned that the internet is used as an organizing principle, and with where today's technology is going, I'm curious if forced transparency through social activism, such as the Snowden and the Panama Papers, is considered civil disobedience, or is that something else? And how does that relate to different topics and moving people? So.
Anybody who wants to?
I believe the failure is that they don't follow Martin Luther King's prescription, which is don't leave the United States, take your punishment and use your trial as a way to showcase your higher law values. Americans respect people that are willing to get in the ring and then take their licking. And that's what the civil rights movement discovered and the women's suffrage movement. So leaving the field is leaving out that crucial step, which is make your case in court, accept your punishment, and people will more likely will rally around you.
You know the history of Snowden. It was Snowden who went to China, right? And then he went to Russia. Yeah, so he went to two of the most dictatorial places, and it started things off on the wrong foot for him, because people were saying, the average American's going to say, what is this guy? You know, do we trust what he did? Blah blah blah. Whereas if he had stayed here, then and taken his licks, it would have had a much more powerful impact, I think.
Showed his, as Martin Luther King said, you have to start with your moral principles and then state your moral principles in your trial, where you will probably be convicted, to show the continuity of what your concern is. It's not to become famous or any of that. It's to stand by my moral principles. And the last stand is in the courtroom. I guess the really last stand is going into the prison.
I think I want to just challenge that for a moment, because if the trial was declared violation of national security and kept out of the media, then we'd have lost that opportunity for that information. So I think if that's not guaranteed, and I don't think it is guaranteed, then it raises the question whether that's an appropriate strategy.
If it's a criminal trial, it has to be public. Now, search warrants and things like that can be done through the FISA court, but search warrants are always ex parte. That is, nobody's there. But if it's a criminal trial, it's got to be done in public, and the confrontation clause means that your accusers have to be there. So that, and all of the trials for the women's suffrage movement, civil rights movement, anti-slavery movement were public criminal trials, and that was part of sealing your case. We have a higher law principle, a moral principle, and that's what we're going to base our defense on in the trial, which means you will lose because the written law is against you. But that's crucial to showing this is what we're all about. It's not trying to get attention. It's not trying to get donations. It's this moral principle that we'll stand on as we go to jail, as we go to prison. If you're lucky, an appeals court will reverse the conviction, and that happened in some of the civil rights cases. But before there can be a reversal, there's got to be a conviction.
Just a moment of civil disobedience.
Well, actually, no, she's been waiting very patiently for a long time, and a student, so please go ahead. She was there first. Please go ahead.
This might come out a little bit choppy, but we've put a lot of emphasis on the activist and commitment and execution of all of these being necessary for these movements to be successful, like you just said, with the showing up to trial, committing on your trial. So in this increasingly globalization-driven world where we can have influence through social media, through media, to any part of the world from a almost more privileged standpoint of not being directly threatened, do you think there's any way that people in ours or in distant situations can have effects on changing over negative regimes of other areas, not just through ideology, but through some sort of driving action? Does that make any sense?
You want to take that?
Well, I mean, I can agree with some of these points and disagree some of these points. I was arrested, beaten, put the gun in my mouth, officially proclaimed a terrorist in my country. I would never ever thinking of leaving my country. That was my country, and leaving my country would be the victory for the very scumbags I wanted to bring down. That was not the courage. That was the common sense of knowing that if I leave, my friends will leave as well. So I mean, it has nothing to do with the courage, or it has to do something with the power of the personal example, as you explained. Speaking of the internet, there will be a very interesting and long session tomorrow on the power of the new media. And I don't want to spoil that whole show. I think the new media are a tremendous tool of bringing people together fast and cheap, as opposed to traditional methods of organizing leaflets, placards, radio commercials, knocking on the doors. I think that they brought a lot of the great things to especially documenting human rights abuses, because even in the most low-tech place in the world like Bahrain, you have a demonstration and everybody is taping. In fact, my organization is now experimenting, and this is also the answer to the question of surveillance. We did a big survey of what the activists may need in a digital era. And we are building an app that will enable you the encrypted communication, fast upload of human rights violation report and media upload, and fast erase of selected things from your phone in case you get arrested. So we understand this, and we try to figure out how to do it in a digital age. However, never forget the lesson. How many of you have heard about the Coney 2012? Okay. Don't get succumbed by the clicktivism. Yes, I clicked 3 times like on a Facebook this morning and saved a polar bear or 2. Only the actions in the real world are changing the planet. Internet is important in organizing. It is a great tool for public awareness rising, but if you want to save the planet, please turn off the lights or your computer screen instead of going around and clicking on different pages.
Why don't you tell us what you really think? All right, next question.
I wanted to ask you a question in regards to countries that have experienced civil disobedience but were not as successful in achieving the goals that were proposed by the opposition groups. Like, in particular, a very good example would be modern day Russia. They've had protests starting in 2011. It's 2016 right now. It's been 5 years. And the goals of the Russian opposition groups have not been met. And there's high censorship in the media. Every opposition member is prosecuted. What do you think is the reason for that? Is it the failure? Is it just, are these groups failing because of the dictatorship, or is there something that the specific groups are doing that is not as effective as it would be? And do you believe that the only way for Russia, for instance, to achieve their goals would be through an actual revolution, how they have done it in the past?
Russia is an interesting case, and not only that they're in a very unprivileged position, they're facing the man who examines the art of nonviolent struggle very well. In fact, the Ministry of Defense of Russia has proposed a mandatory course on universities on how to prevent colored revolution. So they're facing the very knowledgeable person who is obsessed with everybody involved in nonviolent struggle. My organization is every 2 weeks on Russia 1. So I mean, it's like when you look at the level of obsession, it's a dangerous opponent. However, you never blame your opponent for your failures. I think when you look at what is wrong there or what should be done there, and it's very difficult to give advice as a foreigner, first of all, it's a lack of unity. When you look at the people who were protesting in 2012, it was limited to urban people with iPads. They never understood that the real numbers are lying where the rednecks are. And they never went and recruit and knock on the door and try to organize the very foundation of Putin's power, which is the rural, less educated people. So that's a demographic view on it. Second is a strategic view on it. You need to promote an idea of the alternative society. And up to now, all of the protests in Russia were reactive to something the government was doing, as opposed to offering something new or something different than the current regime is selling to the people very effectively through the propaganda means, censorship. I agree with you. Last but not least importance, they're picking the wrong battlefield. Political protesting in Russia is something where Putin is skilled, trained, and he can always bring bigger numbers than you can. What about non-delivery? When you look at where the Russians' protests were super successful, it was in the fact that they are facing the very corrupt and inefficient government. And in fact, the coolest protests in the world were done in the cities of Yekaterinburg, where, for example, the mayor and the governor promised that they will fix the potholes. So what these guys did, they put the faces of the mayor and the governor in graffiti around every pothole in the city. So now when you hit the pothole and curse, which happens when you hit the pothole, of course, you curse a living personality. And of course, being one-sided as it is, the regime responded to this to the most stupid way. Instead of filling in the potholes, they just cleaned the graffiti and left the potholes. So efficiency is looking at where the regime is not delivering. Never forget that the Arab Spring, whose only successful transition story up to now is Tunisia, didn't start as a political upheaval against dictatorship. It started around the bread and butter issues. So you want to pick the battlefield which kind of suits you and not your opponent, and you want to pick the small victories and the battles you can win, which drops into the tactical planning. You also want to avoid tactics of concentration where violence is likely to occur or people risk to be arrested or shut down, and do low-risk tactics like hitting pots and pans, doing graffiti, and doing this kind of stuff. All of this is a part of training and an estimate you make before you get involved. It's very easy to go out in the street and chant. The problem is not always effective.
Okay. Sir, I believe you were next.
Hi. Yeah, I felt that perhaps there's a bit of a wrong comparison in looking at how whistleblowers were handled or how civil disobedience was handled back in the civil rights movement compared to today, and the idea of, for instance, going to jail and becoming a martyr as a very strong way to prove a point. I mean, when you look at Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, and you compare it with the leak of Chelsea Manning, they've been treated in very different ways. And I would like to challenge the idea that, for instance, Edward Snowden would serve more to the cause as a silenced martyr in jail than as he is now, in which he's actually talking to millions of people online and is becoming one of the most interesting political philosophers of the modern age. Well, how do you feel about that?
Well, maybe so, but maybe not. Because as several gentlemen have said up here, in very important places, which is the middle, the rednecks, the people you need to get on your side, the people that at the end of the day you have to live with, are not going to be impressed with Edward Snowden. They are not. But if he had used the trial as a platform, they would have been impressed with that. Don't forget that for these movements to be successful, I'm so glad you used the word redneck. The people in the country who do not agree with you have to be brought along, because you need those numbers to ratify the 19th Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. So people who will start off resisting with these sorts of proven, in the American political tradition, civil disobedience tactics, eventually they'll be brought along. But it's long, it's arduous, people get impatient, but that is the proven historical way of success. But you got to go where the people are, not the ones who agree with you, the ones who disagree with you, and slowly. 1842, Seneca Falls, 1920, the 19th Amendment is ratified. It's slow, and it's hard work, but that's the people you need to convert and live with.
I agree wholeheartedly. I hear your point, but I think you have to be aware that all of us are in this little echo chamber, okay? We're sure that, you know, those of you here at CU probably are convinced Bernie's going to win the election. But go to Nebraska or South Dakota, and that won't be so. So I think that, you know, we particularly with social media, it makes it worse in that sense. Instead of reaching out, we keep listening to the same people. And I hate to tell you, I'm 64. Every election going back when the Democrats were running, I was convinced we were going to win. And this is before social media, because I was talking to all people who agree with me. And then, you know, when McGovern won Massachusetts alone, that, you know, I was shocked. So I think it's really important to reach a broad coalition of people. This is what we've very painfully tried to do in North Carolina with our movement.
I actually favor the questioner. I favor your side of the argument, and I disagree here. I see that what you're saying is completely viable and traditional and may actually take a very long time, but my experience is that knowledge has organizing power, and it depends on the quality of the person and what their skill set is and what information they have to bring out. You see, I don't think that certain key secret stuff would be allowed in the public during that public trial. I think that that would be blocked, and I think that the mainstream media in the United States would basically be dictated how to spin it and turn him into a terrorist, and that we would never actually recruit the people who aren't part of that inner circle because they listen to the mainstream media that will get the spin. Now, I'll share my experience where I was going around the country speaking about GMOs more than anyone in the US, and for 13 years I've been doing it. Several 100,000 people were in the audience. I was on media all the time. And in 2010, I started to meet people who were quoting my words and quoting the studies that I brought out and doing it better than I was. And they were organizing moms of autistic kids, organizing people in their natural food stores, and creating an activist network. And we caught up quickly and started to help organize that. And we gave them the information and then the training, and they started to bring it out to others. So if I had gone to trial and didn't have a chance to continue to educate, just assuming that that was an option, which it wasn't, to continue to drill down on the science and convert it into English and create stories that were behavior change messaging, that was the information, that organizing power, and then everyone else took it and turned it into a movement, along with other people that I was working with. And that may be what Snowden's doing, what his skill is going into the details of this stuff, and then other people will pick it up, and then you've lit a fire on dry grass all over. So I see, because of the internet and the ability to organize, and some people, it's just not appropriate for them to just go to jail, and it becomes very narrow in a yes-no situation. This is nuanced, and he has an opportunity to convey that information to a large number of people at this point.
Okay, so I think you're comparing apples and oranges, because what you're talking about with your movement is consumer education and market pressure. You're at the stage way before civil disobedience. You haven't been shut down yet. You are politicking, you are speechifying, you're mobilizing market pressure, and you haven't hit that wall of failure. You've been very successful. And following Martin Luther King's steps and Father Robert Drynan's steps, it's only after all of those measures, speechifying, politicking, petitioning, going to the State House, have failed, that it's time to move into the civil disobedience phase. And so I think you're very astute at and have succeeded in the preliminary stages. When they're getting ready to put you in jail, give me a call.
All right, it is.
I would say about Snowden, we talk about iconic photos we've talked about. The photo of Snowden with Putin, forget it. 90% of the Americans are not going to trust anything he says. Doesn't matter what's in there. They just see that picture. Putin kills journalists. Putin has invaded 2 countries, okay? And by Snowden allowing himself to be used by Putin, it completely discredited him in the eyes of maybe not you, because you listened to when he did South by Southwest. But do you think 90% of Americans even know what South by Southwest is? They don't. And so all they saw was on every local small newspaper, every small TV station, and every tiny town, him and Putin. And that did it. He was toast. I knew at the minute it happened that was a huge mistake. And he would have had a civil trial when he came here, and things that were already in the public domain that he had released would be evidenced by the defense. That wouldn't be suppressed. They couldn't suppress it because it was in the public domain. Yeah. So I actually disagree. I think he did an incredibly stupid thing by what he did.
Let me just, we are officially out of time, but if the panelists are willing to answer a few more questions, I am told we will not be booted out of here. Donald Trump's campaign manager is not on his way, so these two questions, we'll take these, those will be our last.
I just have a tiny question for Serja. You mentioned that there was a band that inspired you to get involved with resistance organization, and what was the name of that band? If you don't mind.
Are you sure you want to hear?
I'm sure.
Okay, decent people and elderly ladies, put fingers in your ears. Now, this is an order. It was a super band made by 3 punk new wave bands in Serbia, making that one song and playing it from the truck. And actually my book starts with a story from the truck, like following the truck. And but it was called Rim Tuti Tuki, which in Serbian means I put my beep in you. I self-censored myself. It's called Blueprint for Revolution. You can buy it on Amazon, anywhere.
There's a great documentary you ought to watch. It's on Netflix called Rockin' the Wall, about rock and roll knocking down the Berlin Wall. Don't forget the power of rock and roll, baby.
Oh, all right, and one more question over here.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick response, Charlie, to a very specific challenge you made around what are we doing about Saudi Arabia. There is an action every single person in the room can take. It is not a civil disobedience, but following 9/11, there was a joint congressional investigation with a report, hundreds of pages, not the 9/11 Commission report that we're familiar with. 28 pages of that was classified by George Bush, and we think it deals with the funding of 9/11 by Saudi Arabia. So if you go to 28pages.org, you can very easily call. There's both a Senate and a House bill right now to declassify that. And let's get the truth out as we can. So everyone, please, very simple action. Thank you.
Can I answer to the question of Saudi Arabia, what can we do? It also deals with a lot of tactics and strategy. One of the tricks in successful nonviolent struggle is to design a thing which will work in your environment. We are all probably aware of existence of a great, super effective, very brave group of women called Femen that kind of challenge the prejudices about the women and dictatorships and Islamic approach to the women by posing with their bare chests and using their bodies as a billboard. Well, this is not appropriate tactic for a place called Saudi Arabia. But the Saudi Arabia has their heroes, so please go type Manal al-Sharif on your Google phones, and you will discover a young woman who discovered just the tactic that will work in a very oppressed society. She bravely taped a YouTube clip of herself driving a car. That's a felony. In Saudi Arabia, women are not supposed to drive the car. It got 300,000 Twitter shares in Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, if you want to help the brave people there, you can support the people who have real guts to oppose this crazy regime. Sometimes, if you need a man for a job, it's a woman.
So what about that inappropriate website? Do you have that? Do you have that citation?
Thank you for a very, very good panel. I wondered if any of you have known about the Democracy Spring. It started as a walk from Philadelphia. They're walking now towards Washington, D.C. It will be a mass sit-in with people doing nonviolent training and 3 prongs. It's to get everybody, first, get money out of politics, get every person a vote, and get the Supreme Court to reverse the corporations are people. So, comments.
Anybody heard of that panel?
No, but it
members?
sounds great.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for sharing. That was
thank you.
great. And I think we'll take one more and then thank our panel and let them do whatever it is they. I suspect they're going to drink. That's my guess. But
can you quickly address why the Occupy movement just fizzled?
Well, we have a half of chapter in the book, and they were super pissed on me when it came out. I met them in 2011 in November through the marvelous old gentleman, a kind of leftist icon among professors, a guy called Todd Gitlin. And he told me, these kids are super crazy, you want to meet them, they're inspiring. I met them. It took me 2 hours to figure out what the heck they want. 2 hours, and I consider myself a professional when it comes to political movement. I think one of the problems was that, you know, when you ask them what's the plan, what's the strategy, so, oh, it's too corporate, we don't have strategy. So A, it was not clearly defined what is the change. Say, we hate banks, and say, okay, I'm a Harry Potter, boom, banks disappear, what's there? Then this is the first problem. The second problem was picking the wrong tactics. Naming your movement after the most demanding concentration tactics in the world is so stupid. What about labeling yourself 99%? Well, everybody in this room probably can belong to 99%, but sorry, I can't go and occupy Zuccotti Park. You know, I'm too busy with my job. I have a woman, I have a kid. So, you know, it's like if you make it very exclusive in the beginning, and then the big rapper comes to support you, and then you said, we don't want you, because you are 1%. This is exactly the way to fail. And they made all of these mistakes, and on the top of it, probably the most dangerous mistake of every organization, they needed to get to every decision through 100% consensus. By waving their hands and doing stuff like that, which was looking really nice. But in practice, that means if I want to undermine them, all I need to do is to come on the meeting of 10,000 members and be one person against, and they will never move. So the lack of clear vision, concentration to one topics, wrong branding of the movement, combined with the most terrible decision-making process that you can imagine when it comes to the movements, was probably the thing that killed it. But the need is there. The need for social justice in America exists. There are so many people who are thrilled and hot to organize among itself. Occupy was one attempt. What Bernie Sanders is trying to do is another attempt. Hopefully, there will be a movement clever enough to avoid both mistakes, to be an exclusive movement of liberal, pierced people who are occupying the park, or to be tied to the mainstream politician. I think it should be somewhere in between.
well, thank you very much to our panelists, and thanks everybody for coming.